Everyone good?
I think
Ready.
so. Hello and welcome to this episode of Talk the Talk, RTR-FM's weekly show about linguistics, the science of language. For the next hour, we're going to be bringing you language news, language theory, and some great music. Maybe we'll even hear from you. My name's Daniel Midgley. I'm here with Ben Ainsley.
Good morning.
And Kylie Sturgis.
G'day, everyone.
On this episode, we're revisiting the relationship between language and thought. Does our language influence our thoughts to any great extent? Linguists tend to say no, and yet there may be a bit more to this popular idea. We'll examine the case on this episode of Talk the Talk.
So glad to be back in the studio again.
Me too.
I'm feeling pumped. I'm feeling riled up. I am pretty keen to talk about this issue. I know it's a big one, Daniel.
We've mentioned it before.
We have done entire shows on this, and I said that to you. You came to me and Kylie, and you said, guys, I think we're going to have to do shows, plural, about the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis. And I kind of went, stop your roll there, King Daniel. I feel like we've done that. And
Arrival's
this
now
happens.
Currently on DVD, so it's out of the cinemas.
I'm glad that you've mentioned Arrival, because, that was one where that formed a major plot point. And also, there have been some articles that I'm seeing, but the thing is, the articles that I'm seeing don't have that whiff of terribleness.
Oh, okay.
I won't
So
say any more
developments.
now. I'm going to leave that right there.
Because before we jump into the potentially 4-episode deep rabbit hole that is the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, what's been going on in the world of linguistics in the week gone past?
Last time we talked about bebes.
Bebes.
And I just wanted to touch on something I noticed since, just a little tiny update.
A little baby update.
There are a number of perspectives that usually come up when we look at how language is learned. Some people say language is learned. Some people say language is innate. Some people, and I think this is what we touched on, some people say a special place of prominence is given to the role of the caregiver in how children learn language. Like, caregivers give a very specialized introduction, a very simplified introduction so that children can grip onto it.
Absolutely.
It was once called Motherese, but then we realized that
I remember hearing about mothers.
It's not cool because there's dads too. And also a whole bunch of people who are neither mothers nor fathers who exist in children's lives.
If you walk up to a child, you'll pretty much just start doing this. And it involves using lots of nouns, being really loud, being really slow. And we know that people tend to use exaggerated intonation.
Oh, glee-boo, glee-boo.
So some people call it Motherese. We should probably call it child-directed speech. But even so, there are a lot of studies that have examined the role of mothers. Fathers, not so often.
Right.
So I found one that looks at fathers and the way that their language use changes from sons to daughters.
Is the upshot of this going to be dads approach their children genderedly? Because I don't feel like that's a particularly breaking news story.
You think that it seems obvious that it goes that far deep, right?
Yeah, well, to my mind, like, from as far back as I can remember, back when I was a real sort of like high school dingus, coming up with all these big theories about the world, about how I perceived the universe and stuff, right? Even back then, I remembered those studies they did where they dressed the sort of the babies in the certain colours and gave them certain like gendered cues.
Same boy, blue and then pink, and then they observed how people
Parents
behaved
interacted
towards
with
them.
them. So, to my mind, if their interactions change, it stands to reason that their language probably does as well.
But the way in which it does is interesting. And what's going on in the father's brains could be interesting as well.
Is this another giant tube of death experiment?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I love the giant tube of death.
This one comes from Jennifer Moscato of Emory University. It was published in Behavioral Neuroscience. They looked at the way that fathers use language with daughters and also with sons. They got 52 fathers of toddlers in Atlanta, USA. They attached a small computer to their belts, which would turn on for about 50 seconds every 9 minutes to record stuff.
Okay.
They found a few different things as far as words and interactions. Fathers engaged in more rough and tumble play with sons. They also used more what's known as achievement-related language, words like win and proud.
Interesting.
Whereas with daughters, they use words like all and much, these quantifier sort of words. Who do you think the fathers sang more to, sons or daughters?
Daughters.
True.
Yeah.
Also talked about their feelings.
Daughters.
Amazing, isn't it?
Ah.
I just think it's weird. Are dads treating their daughters like they're on like a date or something?
I think it comes from the fact, speaking of anecdotal, baseless gobbledygook, my take on it is that for a huge proportion of men in Western society, their lived experience is that they only ever meaningfully process emotion through the women in their lives. So
Wow.
a new woman comes into their life, and so they just do the thing that they've been doing their whole life without even probably thinking about it. The wife and the girlfriend and the mum is the person you go to when something really intense and upsetting has happened to try and process those emotions.
I've certainly felt that. Yeah,
And
with guys in
the
my life.
male guys are the ones you go to when you've processed that emotion and you want to party or get drunk or just have safe interactions that don't enter any of those sort of emotionally vulnerable zones.
It's why, sorry to bring it up again, Trump was criticised for, it's just locker room talk. And then Bill Bailey said, we don't talk about that in lockers. We were like, hey, look at the joints on this. My one's painted green. Do you think they're doing an upgrade around here? That's about as sensitive as they get in terms of, talking about women.
Okay, but now let's get into the machine of death.
The giant tube
The
of
glowing metal tube.
It was really interesting. They got to have a look at photos of an unknown adult, an unknown child, and their own child with happy, sad, or neutral facial expressions. And when they had daughters with happy facial expressions appear, their brains essentially lit up. They had areas of the brain that were important for visual processing, reward, emotion regulations, more of that than in comparison to sons. And
poor boys.
yeah.
just even from toddlerhood, just can't ever really make your dad happy.
However, something they didn't realise, when the boys, the sons' faces were neutral, that got a response. So when there was an ambiguous response, the fathers would tense up and you get a brainwave reaction there.
How weird.
Yeah.
I wonder how I'd do in this. Is that the first thing you think of, Daniel, as like another parent? Like I'm hearing this and being like, ooh, I wonder what my brain would do.
I totally wonder what my brain would do. But actually, I know what my brain would do because it does this all the time. Like I've got this, little 6-month-old daughter, and when they're born, you think, an infant, rather unimpressive.
Blob.
Then they give you that smile. She turns on the smile, and it's
I
like,
hear a lot about this.
I will protect you for the rest of your life.
See, I didn't get that for ages.
Yeah?
For the first whole year, I was just like, oh, God, I'm socially obliged to keep you alive, I guess.
Oh,
I tell you, though, I felt that for my sons. I loved my sons, but when that little girl turns on that smile, holy crap, I can feel my brain doing it. Now, this kind of article is the kind of thing that I feel like I should do something about, but I don't know what. Like, should I try to approach my children more neutrally, or is it just futile?
No, my thing is, this is the reason why I was like, I'm curious to know what my response would be, but not I really need to know, because like your MRI response, like the response, the response of the neurons firing in your brain is a bit beyond. Like if I had that kind of self-control, a whole lot of other problems in my life would be taken care of.
road rage in general will probably disappear because people will be going,
I'd stop eating terrible snacks.
Oh man, tell me about it. I've got a creme brulee waiting for me when I get home, and I shouldn't eat it, but I will.
I know one thing that it should do. If you recognise that these studies may have some significance in your lives, then you start saying to yourself, okay, we seem to be very empathetic to daughters. Let's start being empathetic to sons as well. Let's start making them more empathetic young people.
But Kylie, it's so hard because they're just maniacs.
Well, maybe this could be a step toward maybe this could be a step toward conscious parenting.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Which is not a bad thing.
Shall we, on that beautifully heartfelt note, take a track?
Yeah, let's listen to Pat Chow with Underwater Daughter on RTR-FM 92.1.
And this week marks the start of what may end up being a pretty comprehensive journey into the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis.
Okay, but we need to talk about what that is. What's your understanding right now?
Okay. Kylie, do you mind if because we've done this a few times, I feel like I can osmosize a bit of linguistics here. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis is a theory within linguistics that basically says the way that we speak dictates the capacity we have to perceive the world. So the classic example that I always trot out for this in my head is the idea that languages that use gender in their language beyond just gendered pronouns some genders might say bridges are feminine and other languages might say bridges are masculine. The languages that have feminine bridges might describe bridges as beautiful and elegant and sweeping, and the languages that have bridges as masculine might describe bridges as strong and proud and powerful.
That is a pretty good rundown. It's the idea that our thoughts are strongly affected by our language, and when we've addressed this idea before, we've trashed it.
It's one of if we've got a hierarchy of poo-pooing things, I have a feeling this might be at the very, very tippy top. We've poo-pooed the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, I think, just about harder than anything
17
else.
times.
No, sorry, I lie. Trump, Sapir-Whorf.
There's a hierarchy.
Fair enough.
But yeah, the notion of the limits of my language are the limits of my world, or we are at the mercy of language, seems very narrow and
we've been offered a lot of
prejudiced.
evidence on Daniel's behalf of why this is not a thing.
Yeah.
And yet, it is extremely appealing.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Oh, it makes, like I said before in the previous segment, late high school, like Ben, who's coming up with all these great ideas about the world, his brain hears this theory and just goes, bam, there it is right there. That's the answer.
I remember it being taught in some English classes as well, that the people who were the indigenous people of the land saw the ships but could not recognise them and did not see them because there wasn't a word for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you not heard this?
I
haven't heard this one.
This story goes that some Native Americans could not see the tall ships, for they had no language to accommodate the reality that was tall ships.
And I've seen that apply to Indigenous Australians as well. They could not see them. They could not see them because this has never happened before, and their language could not. It's like,
So
really?
if they looked out over the ocean, they would just see nothing at all.
That's literally how this
Yeah.
story was presented to me,
Okay.
which is nonsensical.
Yeah.
Linguists would say that thought comes first and then language follows.
Right. Now, but you're bringing it up and you've given us the inclination that this might be a multi-show run, so I'm thinking some big stuff is going down.
Just a trickle, but I mean, there has been the movie Arrival in which it used the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis as a major plot device. A linguist learned an alien language, and then that language rewired her brain so that she had a surprising, certain, strange new ability.
Which meant you had to go see it twice in the theatres.
And then you had to watch it backwards so that you could see. There's also been some new research that has, for me, casted a slightly different cast on
You
things.
mean it was Rosebud all along? Oh,
No spoilers! And here's another thing. Whorfianism, or the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, isn't just one thing. I have identified 4 things that people mean when they talk about this. Okay, you want to hear them?
Okay, so what are the 4 pillars of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis?
I don't know if it's a pillar, just a kind of idea rising out of the goo. Number 1, the language that you speak determines or influences the way you think.
Okay, great. We covered that one.
In ways that are very mysterious and interesting.
Right.
Number 2, the language you speak will have more words for things or fewer, depending on what kind of thoughts or cultural things are going on.
Right. Now, that's an element of the Sapir-Whorf that we've said makes sense.
Okay, yep. It sounds all right.
If you're a hunter-gatherer, you're probably going to care a lot more about like how to hunt and gather than if you're a information technology worker in Seoul.
Number 3, the language that you speak contains categories, and it's easier to think in terms of categories your language has, like your bridges with masculine and feminine.
Right. Okay.
And then the 4th one, and this is one that almost everyone believes,
Okay.
you can get people to think a certain way about things by expressing things in a certain way with certain words.
This sounds like the kind of thing magicians do.
Like,
Yeah,
is
they're
that
trying
literally
to
what
get
they
you
mean?
to
Power
pick a certain
suggestion?
card.
I was actually thinking opinion polls.
Oh, yes.
Opinion poll wording.
Like in Yes Minister, where they said, yes, if you choose certain things a certain way, you're more guaranteed to get this kind of result from your polling group.
Like if people use non-sexist language, will that result in people being less sexist?
Oh, okay, I get you.
Stuff like that. Okay, well, we're going to tackle the first one today, that the language you speak either determines or weakly influences the way that you think. We haven't talked about the reason for the name. Edward Sapir was a linguist and an anthropologist in the early 20th century. And his take was that all languages are linguistically valid, which isn't a new idea for us, but it was at the time for a lot of people because they thought that the language that certain people spoke was inferior. And Edward Sapir said no. He said, the worlds in which different societies live are distinct worlds, not merely the same world with different labels attached. And this is kind of true. We can all think of words that don't translate well into other languages, and to that extent, our different languages kind of do reflect different categories or different ways of looking at the world. Now, Benjamin Lee Whorf was a linguist at about this time, and he came to be associated with this idea because of his grammar of Hopi, which is a Native American language in Arizona.
Yeah. One of his central arguments in his paper on language, Determining Thought, was that the Hopi terminology for time gave them a different and unique understanding of time that was different to, say, standard Western thought that was out there.
Right. He didn't think that they had time on their verbs, and that this corresponded to a kind of timelessness that was relevant for them culturally.
Yeah.
So he saw a connection between the way the language worked and the way that they perceived time.
There's an Australian version of this where I can't remember which Indigenous language didn't have a word for either tomorrow or yesterday, one of the two. I can't remember which one, but it was always presented to me like, isn't it fascinating how the natives just don't care about, like, say, the future or the past, depending on which one it was. And my brain was just like, that's not how people work. No matter what language you speak, you are aware of the fact that things happened the previous sun cycle and that things will probably happen in the following sun cycle.
Yeah, there's an awesome chart, for example, in central Perth, which demonstrates the seasons that are mapped out by the Indigenous people of the area within Perth. So, But yeah, in 1994, Pinker said, okay, first of all, I really doubt that Whorf actually did this kind of research with the Hopi people, and then eventually they did get around to asking the Hopi, and they said, yeah, that's not true at all.
That's not how our language works in the least.
Other linguists have challenged both Whorf's analysis of Hopi and also their sense of time. But what we've said before is that there are two ways that people think of Whorfianism. The strong view, where language is a straitjacket, and if you don't have a word for something, you can't think in those terms. That's linguistic determinism. And then the other one is that it's linguistic relativity, that it has some kind of influence.
Like a nudge effect.
Kind of. Now, I was aware of this again because I found in Business Insider an article by Kevin Loria. He was talking about an episode of Radiolab, and the article's called "No One Could See the Color Blue Until Modern Times."
You're talking about the idea that blue is just sort of like an offshoot of green that has only come about in sort of like modern times.
Okay, tell me about Homer.
The idea that when Homer was describing the sea as a wine colour indicated that there was no such thing as blue, because wine, well, let's face it, it's kind of a darky red. And so in translation, when they spotted that, they said, aha! People in those ancient times must not have known of blue because we have this passage here. Case closed.
Homer being the absolute scion of getting all things exactly right.
And then the Cyclops came over the hill and he said, look at this wine-coloured sea. I'm getting a bit drunk.
I think it was Tom Robbins, the author, who said Homer, who was blind and didn't have any editor.
Yes.
He points out that blue seems to be the color name that arrives latest on the scene, at least as far as written records we have. So Kevin Loria draws on work from William Gladstone and Guy Deutscher. He says, it seemed the Greeks lived in a murky and muddy world, devoid of color, mostly black and white and metallic, with occasional flashes of red or yellow, insofar as they described it in their records. This article is a bit of speculation mixed with fabrication. It's the kind of thing someone might write if they didn't know a lot about linguistics. They even pull out the unfortunate Himba study with the 12 colors.
Which has since been categorically effect disappears, disproven. And the thing I always wonder about is, okay, I think back to Greek archaeological artifacts that I've seen in museums and stuff. You know, they had cool stuff like mosaics and painted pottery and whatnot, covered in colours. Like if you're an artist in Greece and you need to like pass me the blue paint, please. Like it's got to like what do you say? Pass me the slightly more oceany brown, please.
Yeah, if you were trying to make a mosaic and you couldn't
literally
see the difference between blue and green, you'd be getting them wrong. It'd be a patchwork of blue and green if you couldn't see it. But that just doesn't
happen. Blue
happen.
didn't exist, or perhaps the formal category of blue didn't exist, but everyone painted things blue.
They called it Bob instead. The colour Bob.
And this is the essence of a linguist's complaint about the strong version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, is that, you know, even if you don't have a word for a thing, you can still perceive that thing and you can still operate in the world as though you see it. So the problem with the strong version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is that language is not a straitjacket. We can think outside of terms laid down by our native language. We can circumlocute if we need to talk around a word we don't have. We can invent words, as we do all the time. We can borrow words. And sometimes we even have a word that we can't think of. It's just on the tip of our tongue.
Thingamabob.
And
Whatchamacallit.
Duvalaki.
Who's a what's it?
And yet, even though
Bob.
we can't come up with the word, we can still talk about the thing.
It seems like, so far, we're still kind of dragging this theory through the mud. So when's the uptick?
I just wanted to take this time to establish that linguists correctly reject the strong version of Whorfianism.
Right.
But some of the weaker versions might have some appeal. So let's take a bit of a track and then come back to it.
Sounds good to me.
Let's listen to, since we're talking about Blue, let's listen to Heathcote Blue, Friend, It Has Been a While on RTR-FM 92.1.
You didn't want to do Eiffel 65?
No, I do not want to do Eiffel 65.
Really?
Really.
I'm blue, dub and dee dub and da.
Oh, I hate that.
On this week's episode of Talk the Talk, we are once again revisiting the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that how you speak dictates how you think. Now, the full-on, intense, firm version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is bad and wrong. But, Daniel, what have you got for us?
Let's talk about how language might influence your personality. Do you have any feelings on how being an English speaker might influence you versus, when you're speaking something else?
I find that English might be a tough one to zero in on in this regard because there's so much cultural differentiation within English.
It's such a mishmash of many different languages.
Like if you stick an American and a Brit side by side, like especially particularly sort of like cultural standouts or cultural stereotypes of those two places, they are very different people.
Okay, so what you seem to be saying is that even though English, there's variation in the kind of English we speak, but as far as the way we handle verb phrases and the way we put our adjectives before our nouns and structurally, Australian English and American English and British English really kind of the same sort of thing with minor variation.
Yeah. So now we're trying to figure out how that structural reality of our language might influence who we are.
Right.
Well, the non-linguist in me doesn't really know how saying eyes blue instead of blue eyes would change the way that I manifest personality.
Okay, well, as far as personality, there's a study by Jean-Marc Dewal and Aneta Pavlenko. They looked at bilingual Spanish and English speakers, and they gave them a test that measured the big 5 personality traits, which are
introversion versus extroversion, agreeableness versus non-agreeableness, whatever that word is,
versus crankiness.
Yeah.
You got your neuroticism versus your confidence kind of style.
Yep. Those are 3. There's also conscientiousness versus, I guess, slobbiness.
Yeah.
And then openness versus closeness. Openness to experience.
Yeah.
Right. They examined people when they spoke English and when they spoke Spanish, and they found that when people took the test in English, they were more extroverted, they were more agreeable, and they were more conscientious than when they took the test in Spanish.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not sure how this is supposed to shake out as far as the structure. Is it the structure of Spanish that's making them that way, or is it more cultural and not linguistic at all?
Yeah.
Well, that's that. Yeah, I can't help but think surely that would have to be the bigger thing. Is the culture of the language that you're speaking influences the personality that you espouse, not the language itself.
This idea isn't new. This goes back all the way to 1968 when Susan Irvin at UC Berkeley tested bilinguals, again, once in French and then again in English. When people told stories about pictures they saw, in English, they focused more on female achievement, physical aggression, verbal aggression toward parents, and attempts to escape blame.
Wow.
Gosh.
Yeah.
That's rather depressing.
She also tested women in Japanese and in English. Actually, she had an interpreter test the women in Japanese. Might that have caused some kind of effect
Yeah, that's
or
true.
some sort of
That's
change?
might be a factor.
Now, I'm not sure if this really is about the language. I think that this might be about your skill in the language. Like, it's very difficult to be a balanced bilingual. And I know that when I speak Spanish, a language that I'm not great at, I really do feel like a different person. But it's because I'm being asked to do something that I'm not that great at and may not feel so confident in.
Yeah, right.
Many students of mine have said, when I speak English, I feel like a child.
Yep.
And it's so frustrating, especially when you've got all these higher order thoughts and think to yourself, I am the top of my class in China, and here I am reduced in your class to going, okay, can't I please?
This is a pen.
Frustrating.
And so I don't think that this has anything to do with the structure of the language or anything like that. I think it's just about fluency. But now let's talk about another experiment by Panos Athanasopoulos, a linguist from Lancaster University in the UK, and Emmanuel Bylund from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. They think that language influences our perception of time.
Okay, so we're coming back to Hopi Town.
Well, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we talk about time, we tend to do so in terms of distance. Like we say, what a long day, or, a short time. We don't say, I need to take a small break. We would say, I need to take a short break.
For the most part, yeah.
And Swedish speakers do this too.
Right.
But Spanish speakers, on the other hand, do talk in terms of a small break, not a short break.
Right.
These researchers wanted to know if the language they spoke made them better or worse at certain kinds of spatial reasoning. Would the Spanish speakers be better at recognizing size because they talk about things in terms of big and small? Oh. And would the Swedish speakers be better at detecting time because, long and short? So here's what they did. They showed 40 Spanish and Swedish speakers a little animation of a line growing, getting longer. And they asked them how long they thought the video took, estimating the length of the video. Right? Now, there were two videos. Both videos took the same amount of time, 3 seconds.
Right.
But in one of the videos, the line grew a lot.
Right.
And in the other video, the line only grew a little bit.
Gotcha.
And they thought that maybe because the Swedish speakers were used to thinking of time in terms of length, like a short day, they thought that maybe the video with the short line would seem to take less time than the video with the really long line.
Even if the time allocated to each video is exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Well, the Swedish speakers did get fooled by the long and short lines.
So they underguessed on the short line and they overguessed on the long line.
They thought that the line that grew longer in distance took longer because they talk about things in terms of long and short times.
And presumably the exact same thing would happen to an English speaker because we use the exact same mode of language.
That's right. And the Spanish speakers, on the other hand, didn't get fooled by the long and short thing because they don't have that metaphor for time in their language. But they did get tricked by another thing. Instead of having lines that grew or got smaller, it showed a container that appeared to be filling up.
Okay.
Because they would say things like it was a really full day.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Intriguing.
So, this is a fairly modest result and a pretty interesting one. I mean, it's not like, speakers of Asian languages don't have plural markings on their nouns, so they're really bad at counting things. It's not like that at all.
Indigenous people couldn't see the ships.
Right, that kind of thing. The language we speak seems to have a very slight effect on how we think, and that's kind of interesting.
Our perceptions of time can be altered by the adjectives that we attach to the description of time.
Just the way that we're used to thinking of things. This is the kind of thing I used to rubbish a lot. Like, no, it can't be that way. The thoughts have to come first, and then the language follows.
But then you have the opportunity to test it, and then test it again, and then test it in different circumstances. That's how science works.
And I noticed that, you have to get a pretty specific test to be able to detect this.
Yeah.
Right.
But it is detectable, and it does seem to happen.
So I feel like this is akin to some of our Do Animals Do Language shows where we've gone, no, but there's this small interesting thing that's happening. Yeah.
Well, this is a small interesting thing that's happening.
That's cool.
In favor of mild.
Super mild. Weak attractive for Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis.
Exactly.
I like it.
I'd like to see what other tests they might like to come up with.
Well, I would too. And you know what? We're going to see as we continue this series in weeks to come. We'll see
Shows
some other
2, 3, and 4 inbound.
We're going to be tackling the other 3 claims in future episodes, so watch out for those.
Excellente. Well, we best take a track while we prepare ourselves for Word of the Week.
Well, since we're talking about time, let's listen to a new one by Wire that says This Time on RTR FM 92.1.
And if you've thought to yourself, you spin me right round, baby. Right round like a record, baby. Round, 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 round. Then you're in the right place. Because it's time for Word of the Week.
You know, I often notice when a word is new to me, but I sometimes fail to notice when a thing has become a craze and there's a word attached to it. And that's where the Australian National Dictionary Centre shows me how it's done. They're at ANU and they tweet at AusWorders. They had a tweet where they showed a few new terms that had popped up in their word box. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Their word box?
Their word box.
What is their word box?
Their word box is the
where
place
they keep
where...
the words.
No. It's the place where you can suggest words for them.
I like the idea that there's just a box of words.
I do too.
Have a rummage every day. What do we got now?
We'll provide a link to the word box on our blog, talkthetalkpodcast.com.
It looks like a box of words.
The terms are Quokka selfie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is a small marsupial endemic to the island off the coast of where we live in Perth, an island called Rottnest. It is a powerfully cute, powerfully friendly little creature called a quokka, which looks like an even smaller, cuter version of a wallaby, which is in turn a smaller, cuter version of a kangaroo. It's like a chihuahua-sized kangaroo, but squished in every way to just be hyper cute.
About the size of an average-sized cat.
Yeah.
And you can take a selfie with them. They love to pose.
Quokkas are one of those rare kinds of animals on Earth that just have absolutely no fear of humans at all.
Another term they gave was haram dingo.
Haram dingo.
Haram dingo.
Harambe, obviously.
No, haram as in forbidden.
Oh,
in
sorry.
Arabic.
Not halal.
Oh, I see.
Well, a haram dingo is somebody who likes to take a halal snack pack, the tasty
Yummy.
agglomeration of chips and meat and sauce and things
Just
like
deliciousness.
that. And they like to add weird things or subtract weird things like no garlic or with ketchup or... You're a haram dingo.
All right.
Put it onto a bagel. That would be yummy.
Just stop.
But the third one involves this meme, which I put up on our Patreon page. It says, somewhere out there is a man with a man bun trying on his new romper with his fidget spinner in one hand and his vape in the other.
Oh, okay. So we're at a bit of a nexus here, and this, in one specific regard, is very true to my heart as the remaining high school teacher amongst us.
Yeah, go on.
The fidget spinner is not a thing that a guy with a man bun would be playing with.
It might be.
No.
I've never played with it before. I'm going to open this one up.
Would you break that? Yeah, crack that open. We're going to
checking
crack the
it
seal.
out.
I'm new here. This is my
And you've been
spinner
confiscating
virginity.
them a lot, apparently.
Oh, I haven't been, but the confiscation boxes are just full of these things.
Okay, so what do we got here?
It's a thing with ball bearings.
Focus your mind. It has ball bearings, does it?
It's got ball bearings in it, and you can
Okay.
spin them.
Right,
Hold
so
it by
do
the
I
middle,
press
I
it?
think. Watch out.
No.
Just
Yeah.
give it a...
I'm
give it a-
doing it wrong. It's not
Yeah.
doing anything.
Give it.
I broke it. I only just opened it.
Look at it. There it goes. Spinning away.
So
And
that's
then-
all you do.
Yep.
Oh, careful now.
And we just broke the radio station. Sorry, RTRFM.
You're a screamer. I see what this is. My mother-in-law is a screamer as well, and it drives me wild.
I got to spin this thing. You know, what I love about this meme is that you could probably date it to within like a couple of weeks.
Is that all it does?
Yep.
That's really boring.
Yeah, but
Not if you have ADD. I was told the urban myth that the guy who invented it did actually invent it for kids, not with spectrum disorders, but with just ADHD, so that they could have something in their hand that they could fidget with without necessarily launching into like full distraction mode.
okay, well, let's talk about the inventor because there's a little story behind the story.
Okay.
The story that everybody's telling you, see, Kylie's getting into it now. The story everybody's telling is that the inventor, Catherine Hettinger, patented this in 1993, but evidence for the term fidget spinner doesn't appear until 2016.
Yeah, right. Well, she clearly didn't patent the name then.
No, she didn't.
I think you have to trademark a name, don't you? You patent a device and you
okay.
trademark a name.
Okay. Well, I started to wonder, what do they call these things before they were called fidget spinners.
Oh my God, it's going to be something ridiculously dumb and long, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Okay.
I found the patent.
Oh, okay.
I found
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I found it online.
Well, I mean, that's what the patent office is for.
And I got two surprises. One is that the term finger spinner shows up. So that's what they seem to call it before. I mean, this term comes rocketing to life in 2017. Nobody was searching for it before, March.
No. The engram viewer would have just looked like a solid vertical line.
Nothing. But I got another surprise when I looked at the device that was pictured. It's not that thing.
It's not this. But
It's not. Imagine, if you will, a floppy piece of rubber in a round shape, but like it's got a dome, like somebody's poked their finger when it was soft.
I know what you
So
mean.
it looks a bit like a UFO or a small hat.
Yeah,
What, you
almost
go
like
like
a
that?
plate spin thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And it's got a
Okay.
cavity for your finger, and you spin it on your finger. That's what she patented.
Right, so this has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and
You
this,
could do that with a cup. You just go,
yeah, nothing to do with it. And the story is being told that, she didn't renew the patent because she didn't have the money, and now everybody's making these things, and she's not making a dime off it. Well, she didn't make this thing.
Yeah, it's flim flam.
No,
Okay.
no.
It's nonsense.
Oh.
There you go. I'm glad. When I got told the story that it was like to help kids with ADD, I was like, considering that I can see that a couple of kids in my class who I know have ADHD seem to be helped by it, that's way too good to be true. I don't believe it.
There's a bit of a difference of opinion on whether it helps or doesn't. Maybe that's a discussion that we can throw up as far as links on our blog.
Can I say, though, that it fills my heart with joy to know that there's still going to be yo-yos and
hula hoops.
and hula
Rubik's
hoops
cubes.
and Rubik's Cubes and
Rubik's
Pogs.
cubes.
So yeah, fidget spinners have been very, very popular.
Yep, so they have. You know what else is popular?
What?
Rompers.
Are they, though? Because I haven't seen them.
The debate on rompers is, are they ridiculous or are they ridiculous and it's okay?
Well,
Kind of like onesies.
Yes.
Okay, my question is, though, is this a classic media beat-up? Because I genuinely want to know.
It's like avocado on toast.
Have either of you seen in the last 3 months a man anywhere wearing a romper?
Thankfully, no. I would run away screaming.
I do actually have a friend who has posted a photo of self wearing a sky blue romper, matching rompers with his friends at a festival.
See now,
See, at a festival, that's okay. It's like
Exactly.
all bets are off. Go wild.
so much policing, Kylie.
Now, how would you masculinize? If you were worried that a romper was not masculine enough, how would you masculinize that with language? What would you call it?
A man suit? No.
Has to include
like the man
romper
bag.
somewhere in there.
Romper stomper? No.
No,
not romper
Oh,
stomper.
thank God.
LA Times has them as guy rompers.
Guy rompers.
CNN, bro romper, or perhaps bromper.
Well, this is the thing, though. So romper is not what we tend to call them in Australia, though.
What do you call those
We
things?
call them play suits.
Well, hang on. What are we describing here? Because originally the term was like small overalls for kids. This was in 1909. when
That's what I think of.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
in fact, the term rompers is based on the model of trousers, according to the online etymology dictionary.
Right.
Ebony magazine has them down as not rompers, but rompims.
Romping. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice one.
And so it goes. So as long as you put man, guy, or bro on it, you can, I guess, do whatever you want. And
I'm still seeing a nitwick pattern with guys on the beach looking casual going, yes, here I am in my 70s gear, my romper, which was knitted for me. No, it's just
Knitted?
ridiculous.
Is it
knitted
crochet?
rompers. Yeah, crochet rompers, knitted rompers.
Gorgeous.
All in lovely, lovely mohair wool.
I just don't know how to feel about this level of dictatorial fashion policing.
Well, you just muse about it as you play with your fidget spinner.
I will. I have to distract myself because, as we know from Randall Munro's fantastic comic, language police and fashion police are both just policing on thin veneers of class, gender, and race.
but you know
It's
what?
a silly item of clothing, but then I used to think the same way about onesies. So you never know. If I see enough rompers out there and try to stifle my laughter at them, maybe I'll feel the same way about them as well.
But you know what? At least we're talking about something kind of fun and trendy and not
Trump.
politics
Yes.
again.
You did well.
If
You
Trump
did well,
turns
Daniel.
up in a romper, that's it. All bets off.
Trump in a romper. Then it would be a trumper.
A
trumper.
trumper. A trumper.
Then suddenly the fashion police will come in and say, yeah, nobody wear this. Nobody wear this.
That
It's
could be
out.
That could be grounds for impeachment.
Yeah. One can hope.
So our words of the week: fidget spinner and romper.
But not haram dingo.
Well, we'll leave that one.
We'll call it a an honourable mention.
But certainly thanks to the Australian National Dictionary Centre at Ozworders for that help.
So Kylie and I need to get out of here, but Daniel is going to be here to field your questions. So if you have any or comments, or you just want to hear more of his dulcet tones,
Blah, blah, blah.
then you can get in touch by giving us a ring, 9260-9210, or you can send us an email, talkthetalk@rtrfm.com.au.
As always, get in touch with us on our Facebook page and tweet at me. I think I got a room for a couple of tweets at
Go for
TalkRTR.
it. Yeah.
Otherwise, toodaloo.
That's Turnstile with World Famous in Perth on RTRFM 92.1, where you're hearing the closing minutes of Talk the Talk with Daniel. Well, we've gotten some feedback here from Colin, who mentions something super interesting about some of the world's languages. They're called evidentiary particles. In many languages, you know how we say, John arrived. We don't have to say how we know that thing. But in some languages, in fact, many languages around the world, especially in North America and some in South America, you have to say not only what you want to say, but you also have to say how you know that thing. Like you could say that you saw it directly by your senses, like John arrived and I saw it. Or, in English, we would say, I see that John arrived. You could also infer it, like you could say something like John must have arrived. Or you could say that it's hearsay. I heard that John arrived. Except what they have to do is they have to actually use a particle on the verb. You can't do without it. Everything you say, you have to say how you know it. So if we're getting into Whorfianism, then we kind of say, that's interesting. I wonder if that means that two things. They must be super, super good at, knowing how things are. They must be super in tune with evidence. And the other thing we think is sometimes, they must have lived in some sort of environment where they needed to be that aware of evidence. So, what about those two ideas? Well, I'll just refer you to John McWhorter's book, The Language Hoax. And we talked to John way back on episode 167. His take is there doesn't seem to be a need for evidentiary particles because you can see languages that are neighboring each other, and one will have evidentiary particles and the other one won't. So why would one need it and the other one not? What about the other point, that maybe they must be super in tune with evidence? Well, maybe a little bit. Maybe they could do an experiment in the lab where it would show that, they're pretty good at that. But then we're pretty in tune with evidence. Like I already said stuff like John must have arrived, or I heard that John arrived. Yeah, it's not obligatory in English, but, it's not the kind of thing that you can just do without. It's not like I can't think in those terms. Interesting point, though, Colin. I'm really glad you mentioned that. Sam on Facebook says, hey, does anybody know the origins of the phrase, to be up in someone's grill? It's urgent. Don't ask why. I note with some embarrassment, this was received about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Hope you're okay, Sam. I noticed, though, that the Urban Dictionary has an entry in 2005 for all up in someone's grill. Your grill is your face. Now, what's the connection there between grill and face? I first of all thought of those tooth pieces. What are they? They're called grills that people wear. But I think that maybe there's a metaphorical connection between the grill of an automobile, which is at the front of a car, and your face, which is at the front of you. That's my take on it anyway. What do you think? Harant at HH Papazian goes back to our sandwich episode. Liked our sandwich episode a lot. Said, what's the difference between a bottle and a jar? Like, think of those tiny ketchup mustard ones. Okay, people trying to cloud the issue. We settled sandwiches, now we've got bottles and jars, right? I have a lexical solution for this problem, just like I have a lexical solution for the sandwich thing, and I'll tell you what it is. I like to go to a website called wordandphrase.info, where they've got a lot of words from the corpus of contemporary American English. And what they've done is they've looked at which words tend to come up more than random chance. I'll read to you the words that come up, the nouns for bottle. The words that seem to appear near the word bottle is wine, water, beer, glass, plastic, champagne, whiskey, cap. Notice anything? They're drinks. Now let's take a look at the words that occur near jar. Glass, water, cookie, lid, mason, pickle, jelly, butter, food. Isn't that interesting? We use bottles for beverages and we use jars for food. Simple as that, and we know that because of the words that co-occur. Wow. Okay, well, there's a lot of other stuff that we want to cover, but we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank everybody who phoned up, who gave us some messages, who asked questions. You know, one of the most lovely things is to be asked a question, for someone to say, well, what do you think about that? And it makes me feel good, and I never forget how lovely that is. So I want to put that back on you. What do you think about the stuff we've said? Keep going, keep talking. Our Facebook group is open. Tweeting and email, of course, always open. Don't go anywhere, though, because Mark Neal is going to be taking us out to lunch with all the latest and greatest new music. Thanks once again. We'll see you in a future episode, and until then, keep talking.
This has been an RTR-FM podcast. RTR-FM is an independent community radio station that relies on listeners for financial support. You can subscribe online at rtrfm.com.au/subscribe.
Our theme song is by R-Trees, and you can check out their music on rtrees.com and everywhere good music is sold.
We're on Twitter at TalkRTR. Send us an email, talkthetalk@rtrfm.com.au. And if you'd like to get lots of extra linguistic goodies, then like us on Facebook or check out our Patreon page. You can always find out whatever we're up to by heading to talkthetalkpodcast.com.